Chaney. I'm Utah Reuter, and the camera operator is Susan Acuna. Mr. Chaney, can you take me back to your childhood a little bit and tell me a little bit about where and when you were born and your parents?
I was born in Erath County in 1915, and my daddy died in 1920, and my mother died in 1926. And I was a child alone by myself. I made my own living from the time I was 9 years old, and I worked as people for my keep and housing. And then after I got to be about 16, well, I went to work in restaurants and cafes and whatnot. And during the Depression, I plowed for a man for $3 a week in my board, and walking and plowing. And the Depression, in 1929, the banks closed on Friday night. I was working for a man, $7 a week. And he smoked ready rolled cigarettes, and the bank closed on Friday night, and it didn't open till Tuesday. And Monday he come to me and says, "Have you got any money?" He paid me on Friday, and I loaned him enough money to buy cigarettes, and he was a millionaire. And he bought his cigarettes anyway, and I worked for him we raised turkeys. We hatched off that year 40,000 baby turkeys. And then from then on I worked everywhere, the restaurants and hotels and cafes. I helped open the Long Hotel in Stephenville. Charlie Long was the owner and manager. And I worked there, and then I worked in several different places, and I was working for Onyx Cafe on Tarleton's homecoming, and the city was crowded with people. The restaurants, you couldn't get nothing to eat nowhere. And I was washing dishes, and this big old long cook, he said, "Slim, would you come over here and watch these sandwiches? I'm going back here to the restroom." And he never did come back. So that's when I started cooking. And I cooked then for a while, and I went in service and Camp Walters, and stayed there 11 days, and then I come to Camp Barkley in 42 in April, and I was in the 53rd Medical Training Battalion, Camp Company B, and they found out I was a cook. I didn't do much basic training. I worked in the mess hall with the pastry man, and he was the head pastry man in Waco, Mrs. Beard's Bakery, and his name was Cheyenne Sharula. I worked with him for a while till I transferred. Then they moved me. One Sunday morning, they said, "Pack your barracks bags. Pack your A bag where you can get into it and get your shaving stuff and change your clothes. And your B bag, you may not see it for weeks." And we set out on the company street from about 6 o'clock in the morning till noon. And the trucks drove up there and loaded us up, drove us 4 blocks down to the station hospital and unloaded us. We sat in the company street there till night, and then they said, "Go check your bunks out." So we stayed in the barracks there for 3 or 4 days and didn't do nothing. Then they assigned us to duty. And me and Ray Clark, Cagle, and John Landry was assigned to the pastry in the patient's mess number 2. We did all the cookies and whatnot, and then we had 2 Chinamen that we worked at night, these two Chinamen, they cooked the nurses and officers' meal at 11 o'clock at night. And they, when we was trying to sleep in daytime, and there's no heating, no cooling or whatnot, one day it was 111 in the shade, and we moved our bunks outside, and the latrine was right in the middle of the barracks, and every time we'd wake up in the daytime, we'd go in and take a shower and wash our head, and of course we didn't have no shampoo. We used just regular soap, and about a week or two, our hair got so dry till it looked like it's snowing. And but in 1942, there was 3 guys. We did 635 mincemeat pies and 101 white layer cakes. But then in the 30th of May in 42, there was 100,000 soldiers, nurses, and doctors around the flagpole. We passed in review. And it was so hot, and people were just falling out like flies everywhere. I stayed at Camp Barkley till May in 45, and I transferred to Camp Bowie. And I was in charge of the officers' mess, or I was assistant mess sergeant there. But I never did draw the pay. In June of 1942, we got rumors in Camp Barkley that we was going to get a raise. We was drawing $21 a month. We was going to get a raise. Every GI was going to draw $50 a month. That was impossible. The government couldn't possibly pay it. Well, sure enough, in June, we got the $50 a month. But in the meantime, we got free stamps. We'd draw a little circle up in the corner of the envelope and write free on it. And we got free stamps all the time. And and the lieutenant, the officers' training school, I was in town one day and I met a lieutenant coming around the corner, and I saluted him, and he gave me $1. I thought, boy, that's pretty good. So I'd go up to the officers' candidate school whenever they'd graduate, and I'd salute them as they come out. They'd all give me $1 apiece, so I made pretty good money there. But that was the fun part of it. And then whenever I went to Camp Bowie, I was an assistant of the officers' mess, and I had 15 German prisoners, and they was the finest fellers you ever worked with. And one morning I had to open up the mess hall at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd work till 5 o'clock that evening, and then the other one would take over, and I was off every other day. So one morning I overslept, and it's 10 o'clock and I got out there. And those prisoners had broke into the mess hall, cooked breakfast, and had dinner on the stove and everything. And nobody didn't know that I wasn't there. But we had one that was kind of a Nazi. And he didn't want to work. He wasn't going to do anything for the war effort. And the rest of them pushed him in the cooler one morning and locked the door. And it's 40 degrees, and he stayed in there all day, and he come out. He was ready to do anything that anybody else did. But on Saturday morning, I had an old Chrysler Royal. It was a 37 model, and I just had it wrecked and had the insides redone, and then it painted it, and just before I went to Camp Barkley. And every Saturday morning I put a carton of cigarettes under the seat. It cost me 60 cents. I'd put a carton of cigarettes on the seat, and those 15 prisoners would wash that thing, shine it, clean it, steal vinegar out of the mess hall, shine the glasses and chrome on it, and then they'd steal my cigarettes. I couldn't give them to them, but they'd steal them from me. And I stayed there till 11th of December 45, and I was discharged 11th of December. And my wife and baby, I had a baby during that time, and we was moving from Camp Bartlett to Colorado City. And we moved up there, and I went to work in a cafe. And this cafe guy, he was Mr. Big, and he had a whole bunch of soybeans, canned soybeans stacked up in the back, and I was doing the dinner, and I'd make rolls and bring up the meat, and I got those soybeans, washed, galloned them, and made a soybean salad. And the people really went for it. And a few days he asked me, he said, "Where'd you get those beans?" And I said, "Well, back there in the back." And he didn't like that. He told me not to use them no more. They wasn't no good. So in a few more days, well, I had brains and eggs on the menu. And he asked me where I got the brains. And I said, "Well, you know that wasn't brains." He said, "Well, what was it?" I said, "It's cold oatmeal." And they ate it and thought it was brains and eggs. He fired me. I went over to Safeway, and the meat cutter didn't show up that morning. And he asked me to go back in the market and help Rebel Phillips cut meat till noon, till he'd come in probably. Well, I went to work that morning, and I cut meat for him, for her, and he didn't show up at noon. And after lunch, I went and eat, and he said, "Come back." And I come back, and I worked 5 years, never made the application. I worked 5 years for Safeway. I worked from 1945 till 50. And then the Safeway store manager, or the district manager, decided that I needed some training. And he sent me down Ballinger to train me for a week. And I went down there and worked with a man that would steal from his own mother. And I told the O.V. Farnsworth on Saturday, I said, "Do you have any other place for me to go?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Okay, I'm going home." So I went back to Colorado City, and that was right at Christmas time. And he called me 2 or 3 days before Christmas, wanted me to go to Big Springs and work with the meat cutter over there through Christmas holidays. And I did. And whenever I went to leave on Saturday night, well, he was going to pay me this minimum wages and not pay me for transportation or nothing. So I told him, "No, just don't pay me." So I come home and I called O.V. Farnsworth, and he said, "Well, what do you want?" And I said, "Well, I want $5 an hour and $5 a day for transportation and 2.5 meals." He said, the check will be in the mail Monday. So it was. And I worked there I left Colorado City. No, I worked for a power plant. Worked for a power plant 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, 53 and 54. And 54 we moved from Colorado City to Abilene. And I went to work for Piggly Wiggly, and I worked there just a little while. And me and him had a disagreement on what kind of meat to put in the meat counter. And he fired me and I quit, but I drawed unemployment. Then I went to work at M System. I guess it was in about 56 when the 12th Mockingbird opened. I went to work up there. And I worked there till 1961. And my wife was sick from 58 to 61, she had my senior gravis. And anyway, that her drug bill was more than my salary. So you can see what kind of financial condition I got into right quick. Well, there was a major come in the store up there one day, and he said, "I want horse meat cutters." So I wouldn't ask him right in front of everybody else where he was. So I followed him around to the deep freeze, and I said, "Where do you want meat cutters?" And he said, "Out at Dice Air Force Base." So he says, "First time you have a chance, we'll come out and make application." And on my day off, I went out and made application. And he put it in the desk drawer. And it was, several months I hadn't heard from him. And one day, Pat Milligan was a meat supervisor for M System. He come in and told Charlie White, my market manager, fired him. And I wanted to know why. And he said, "Well, you're going to work to Dice Air Force Base." I said, "Oh, I put in that application several months ago. I forgot about it by now." And I got by with it, and they didn't fire me right then. But anyway, I went out on May the 8th in 1961. I went to work at Dice Air Force Base. And I was drawing $75 a week. And I went to work out there for $1.99 an hour. As in 61. And I worked out there. I was managed the market for a while. And people is so greedy, I'd hire people and they'd try to get my job. And they'd do everything in the world. One day there was a boy taking a roast out of the counter. No, it wasn't out of the counter because it didn't have a price on it. And put it under my car seat. And whenever I started out off the base that day, well, the MPs stopped me. Well, they knew where to look, and they looked under there. And I'd seen it before whenever I got in the car, and I carried it back in the commissary. And they looked under my seat, and they searched the car. Had let me go. But anyway, then there was another fellow that I hired that he intended, that was his intention, was to get my job whenever he come out there. And he lied and done everything. And finally, it got so bad. See, I was buying $200,000 and $300,000 worth of meat a week. And I could make $100 or I could lose $100. Well, I was laying in bed at night wondering what was happening. So I just got up one morning and went out there and I said, "You can have my job. I'll just step back and make a meat cutter." Well, I was drawing then about, I don't know, it was a whole lot more than I started with. But anyway, in 77, I had bad feet and legs. And I went to, I believe it is in March, 11th of March in 77. I went to the hospital for a physical. And we had to have a physical every year. So I went over there about 9 o'clock in the morning, and about 5 o'clock that evening there was 6 doctors in the room with me. And they says, "You go home and don't ever come back no more." So they discharged me. They give me well, anyway, I was disability. And I just knew I was going to starve to death. And I laid around here for a year before I was able to do anything. But that was in March, and I had enough sick leave and annual leave till it's September before I draw the retirement check. My retirement check and my Social Security and the VA check, I brought $30 a month more home than I was bringing home. So I didn't starve to death.
Back to your Barclay days, what kind of things did y'all do to have fun back then?
Well, we had a day room, and a lot of times at night musicians would get together in the day room, and some of them they was first class musicians, and they'd play hillbilly music, and there was a lot of quartets. They would sing sacred songs, and they on a lot of nights we'd all meet in the day room, and we had down at the hospital that was an MRTC. Down at the hospital we had a day room, and we had a pool room. I had a pool table and card tables, and had everything that anybody nearly would want. And Buddy Garrett was a big, fat black man, and he shined shoes. And I don't know whether it was $1 a week or $1 a month, but anyway, we'd pay him to keep our shoes shine. And he paid income tax that back in then with just shining shoes. But we had a good life. All of us hated it, but we enjoyed it while we was doing it, and it was pretty good duty. This whenever my baby was born in September of '43, I just drawing $50 a month. Well, I had my uniform in the cleaners, and I got a 10-day leave, and I didn't have no money to get my uniform out. So I went to the Red Cross and messed with them for a long time, and they never would let me have it. I just asked for $10. And I went back to the mess hall. One of the old boys says, well, why don't you go up to the Army Emergency Relief? They'll let you have some money. So I thought, well, no, I'll try it. And I went up to the headquarters, Army Emergency Relief, walked up to the window, and the lady said, could I help you? I said, yes, I need $20. She just handed it to me. I didn't sign nothing. I said, well, you want me to sign something? She said, no. She says, if you need it, you'll pay me back. And first payday, I carried it back. And that was experience that everybody ought to have. It just, that was just one of the greatest things in my whole career.
Feel like they were taking care of you.
It was, and I don't know much else I could say except, and after I got able, after I was disability retired from Dice Air Force Base, I was drawing $10.95 an hour. That's what I had accumulated in 17 years, from $1.99 to $10.95 an hour. And after about a year, I laid around here, and my wife was a dental assistant, and she worked, and I kept house and cooked for about 7 years for her. But then I answered an ad in the paper for vinyl siding, storm windows and vinyl siding. And I accepted it, and they bonded me and sent me all the stuff on it. And I did siding here in town, vinyl siding. I sided this house, and I sided houses all over the country and some out of town. And I sold storm windows. But then in '96, I was struck with acute attack of some kind of arthritis. It's not in the bone. My bones don't bother me. Oh, a little bit, but not much. But it's in the tissue between the muscles and the bone. And when the weather changes, I just draw up like that. And I just can't hardly get around at all. But whenever it fires up, I'm all right. But then I started, we was going to a walkers club down here, and I was a boy. Made a little talk down there one morning, and he was talking about the health club, the Hendricks Health Club. And one day we happened to be by there, and I said, well, let's stop in this. And I was walking on walking sticks. And we went in there, she said, well, all you got to do is just get a doctor's okay and give me $30 a month. So I went to my family doctor, and he wrote his name on that slip of paper and I carried it back. And the 16th of May in 96, I started exercising 3 days a week. And I've got up, I was doing real good. I was walking 20 minutes on the treadmill at 2.5 miles an hour till April last year. And I was struck with, it was congestion that sent me to the hospital, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but I didn't. And since then, I've never got back up to exercising like it. But I still go, and I do a little bit. This morning I did 15 minutes on the treadmill, 3 miles on the bicycle, and there's arm bike. I do 20 minutes on that. And then we have in the back room leg push-ups and lift weights and do everything. And whenever I started up there, I could hold my arm up like that and the wind would blow it. Now I do have some ulcers, but I'm fully convinced on it. I couldn't live without it. I may live to be 100 years old, but I'll have to keep going doing that in order to make it that many years. So I guess that's about the end of my career, except I'm set now. Go to the health club, and that's all I do.
When did you meet your wife and where?
I met her on a blind date in, I guess, what, 42, oh, no, 40, about 1941 or 42, I don't know when. Well, anyway, we married in 43, and 9 months and 20 minutes later, we had a baby. And whenever we moved from Colorado, I was in service then, and I rented a little house down on Locust Street, apartment. It was a big, nice apartment, and my wife and baby come to live with me down there. And the bedroom was so small till you could close the door and the baby couldn't fall off the bed. And that was, I think, $7 a month. And that was right after I started drawing $50 a month. And then she was drawing 50 and the baby got 30. So we was doing pretty good. But I would come from Camp Barkley. I worked at night all the time. And if I hadn't been working in the dining hall, we'd starve to death. I wore that old Mackinac, and I'd put chickens and coffee and sugar and whatnot in my pockets and come home. You might call it stealing, but I didn't. I thought I called it taking. And it was all right in the wintertime, but I didn't look good with that Mackinac on in the summertime, carrying chickens and stuff on. But we made it, and it was a hard old go. I left Camp Bowie one time in my old car, and I didn't have any money and no gasoline, but I had a carton of cigarettes. And cigarettes was very scarce. You couldn't buy them for love nor money. And I drove into a filling station, and I told the little boy, I said, I need some gasoline. I don't have any money. And we had to have stamps to buy gasoline. I said, I don't have no stamps or no money. He said, well, what have you got? I said, I've got cigarettes. He said, I'll fill your car up for 3 packets of cigarettes. Okay. So I come to Colorado City, and my dad-in-law was a farmer, and I'd fill up his tractor gas and go back to Brownwood. But it was a hard old go. We had hardships in the service and out of the service. But during the Depression, it was really something.
What are some of the things that you remember the most about the Depression, some of the hardships?
not having nothing to eat, and didn't have any friends. I'd walk down the road and no place to sleep, and nothing to eat, and maybe I would help them up on somebody that needed some wood cut, or maybe wanted a little hoeing done, and they'd take me in for a week or two. And then I had a sister that I'd stay with them a whole lot, but they was just as poor as I was. They couldn't manipulate it. But after I was 16, 17 years old, well, I made it fine. I had money all the time. It wasn't much. Whenever I'd bale hay or thrash peanuts or whatnot, I'd make $40 and $50 a week. Well, that was big money, and I had money all the time. But boys that had cars, they'd want me to go with them to buy gasoline and whatnot, to the dances and whatnot. But I went to the Texas Centennial in 1936, and I had, four guys went. I had $30, and one of the other boys had $15, and these two guys in the back seat had $5 apiece, and we went to the Texas Centennial. We spent the whole day and night, and the next morning we come back after daylight. Well, we got to Glenrose coming back. We was leaving the steamboat, and it was breakfast time, and me and the other guy didn't have any money, and those guys that had $5 apiece bought our breakfast. So we managed to have.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, we had a lot of fun, but oh man, it was that Texas Centennial was something that everybody should go to. It was amusing and cheap. You could do anything for 25 and 30 cents. I know there's a guy selling Hummer tunes, and just a little round deal, and they put it in his mouth, and he could play a violin, a guitar, a piano, anything he wanted to at that Hummer tune. And he sold them for 25 cents a piece. We all bought one. Nobody could play it. We couldn't make a sound on it. But we had a lot of fun, and we had, of course, now what I was talking about, we had money. We spent more money on those guys that had the $5 too. We spent our money on them too. And then we did a little drinking too. They didn't. So that taken care of a whole lot of it. But it's about the end of my career, I guess.
Where was the Centennial celebration? Austin?
The what?
The Centennial, where was it?
It was in Dallas.
In Dallas.
Before the Centennial, I worked at Dallas, Anchor Awning Venetian Blind Department and Storage Company, 18 cents an hour, and I was the head painter. And I painted all the blinds that went on the Venetian, went on the fairground. And I could have my clothes cleaned overnight for 35 cents. And I paid, seemed to me like it was just $7 a week for room and board in a boarding house. But whenever you went to the table, you better be a bowl, because somebody was going to get it. And there was lots of hands reaching out that table. And she would fix our lunch. And we lived in the boarding house, and she'd fix our lunch. And I believe it was just $7 a week we paid for the room and board. But that taken just about all of our money. Of course, we didn't have any money. Most of the guys just got 11 cents an hour. I was in the paint room foreman, and I got 18 cents an hour.
What year was this?
34 and 5. And me and my brother-in-law would come to Stephenville, and we'd buy eggs for 10 cents a dozen and carry them back to Dallas and peddle them out on the street 3 for a dime. And maybe we'd pay for our trip that way. And that's, I worked for a man during the Depression. I was plowing for him for $2 a week in my board, Ray Parr. And I worked for him 6 weeks. No, I worked for him 8 weeks. And he owed me $16. And whenever he left, well, he said, well, I haven't got the money to pay you right now, but I'll pay you just as soon as I can. Well, it went on about 2 or 3 weeks, and he never had paid me. Judge Sam Russell was a judge in Erath County, and I went up to see him, and I said, Judge, Ray Parr owes me $16 for labor, and he won't pay it. What can I do? He said, well, we could sue him. Probably cost us $20. Or we could put him in jail. You never would get it. He said, let me write him a letter. I suppose, I don't know whether he did or not, but I suppose he wrote him a letter. And about 3 days, Ray Parr was looking for me with $16 in his hand. So I suppose Judge Sam Russell wrote him a pretty good letter. And I had a lot of friends like that. Charlie Thompson was at Colorado City whenever I lived up there, and he was a cousin to my half-brother. And I'd go, he was a president of the bank, and I'd go to Charlie Thompson for advice. He was a lawyer, and I'd go to him for advice. And I had a good brother. I've never been in jail. I've never been arrested. And if I haven't had a guardian angel over me all of my life, I don't know. I had to have. Because there's no reason I shouldn't have been put in jail or in the penitentiary and sometime during my life, because I wasn't very nice. I was pretty bad boy sometimes. But I've always worked. I've never been. This is the dullest life that I've ever lived since '96.
What was the worst kind of work that you ever did?
I guess that you mean the hardest kind of work? I guess was thrashing peanuts and baling hay. And I was 16 years old, and I was in charge of the thrasher and the hay baler. Out there in the sand and dirt and dust, and you'd work from sunup till sundown, and we thrashed peanuts for 10 cents a bushel. We baled hay for 10 cents a bale. And now I no telling how much it is. I don't have no idea. But that was the hardest work. And then I worked on the ranch one time, and that was the hottest work and the coldest. And I worked on the sheep ranch at San Angelo for several months. And in the summertime you'd burn up, and in the wintertime you'd freeze to death. And the boss man, it didn't make no difference about the weather. You got out there and saddled that old horse, and you went on work like you're supposed to. And I'd ride all day and look for warm sheep, and come in at sundown and milk the cows and go cook supper. I'd get up in the morning and fix breakfast, and I'd be out milking cows before daylight the next morning. Yeah, I've had a hard life, but I've had a good life. And I've enjoyed every bit of it, I guess. Still working on it.
Did you meet any interesting people during your time at Camp Barkley?
Yeah, the Adolf Cthulhu was our mess officer. And we was making cakes one night, and John Landry, of course, this big old mixing bowl, 18-quart mixing bowl, he'd stir the cakes with his hand. And one day, Adolph Cthulhu come in, or the next night, Adolph Cthulhu come in the mess hall, and he says, "Who wears a gold band on the ring on their hand?" And of course we all looked, and John Landry didn't have his on. And out of 4,200 pieces of cake, he got that piece of that gold band in a little square cake like that. And how come him to get it, I don't know. And he's Adolph Cthulhu. He was the strictest mess officer. He would climb up on the tables and with white gloves on and feel of the rafters, see if there's dust on the rafters. Of course, we didn't have no ceiling in the mess hall, and it had to be spotless. But we had a good kitchen, and we had the pastry was on one side of it, and the cooks was on the other side. These Chinamen was from Colorado, and when our baby was born, they brought me a silver dollar apiece. I've got it down in the bank now, those silver dollars. And they're real silver, too. But Camp Barkley was good for me. I guess whenever I went to camp, I was drinking pretty heavy, and that stopped me. I slept in daytime, and there was 2 buck sergeants. I slept between them, and they would come in drunk every morning, and their heads was up this way and mine was down this way, and I was between them, and they'd vomit. I'd have to help clean it up. So I guess that stopped my drinking career. That had a whole lot to do with it. I imagined I was as ugly as they was. But it was a lot of times there that.
Did they get their alcohol by prescription? Is that what
No, they was ward boys, and they had access to denatured 1-grain alcohol, and you could take 2 ounces and put in a half a gallon pitcher of grape juice, and man, it would be stronger than whiskey. It would be really something. And
Your Kate Smith came to Camp Barkley? Is that right?
oh no, Kate Smith I was working in a restaurant in Brownwood, and Kate Smith sang "God Bless America." She got $25 a night for singing it out at, there was a carnival type, and she sang "God Bless America." And then there was a boy that worked with Doughboys. He sang with her, and they'd take alternate. He'd sing it one time, and she'd sing it the next. And they got $25 a night for singing one time, "God Bless America." And it was beautiful. Kate Smith is. And in Camp Bowie, the officers was going to have a party, and they wanted filet mignon. And I called the meat supply house, and told him I wanted 90 pounds of beef tenders. And he blowed his stack. He said, "You know dang well I can't get no 90 pounds of beef tenders." I said, "That's all right. I'll just call Colonel Weisinger and tell him that we won't have no party." He said, "I'll get them for you." So he got it for me. And we did. We had to. And you'd be surprised how fancy those prisoners cut those beef tenders and roll them in bacon. And boy, they'd fried just perfect. And they was the best cooks you ever seen. They was really good.
The POWs?
Yeah, POWs. And there was a colonel or a major or colonel he had his teeth pulled the same time I did. And I would grill a sirloin or some kind of steak and bake a baked potato, and I'd grind them together. And me and this officer, we would really enjoy that. We didn't have no teeth, but we sure did. And pour gravy over that. It's pretty good eating. But you'd get hungry wanting to chew something. But we stayed fat on it. And right after I got my new teeth, I put a chicken in my pocket one day and brought it home, and Dorothy cooked it. And now fried chicken, man, I was going to go to town on that thing. And I taken that little thigh up and bit down on it, and them teeth turned wrong side out in my mouth. I pulled it off. I eat it anyway, but that's the experience that you'd never dreamed of. It's
What was Abilene like in those days?
Small. Abilene come to Grape Street into Sales Boulevard. And down in town, it was on Chestnut and Pine, and then the Citizens Bank was on the corner of Pine and First, on North First. And it just wasn't, Pine Street and Oak Street was just, in Chestnut was just about all there was to it. And I've hitchhiked all my life, all over the country whenever I was. And I was in Cisco one night, and it come night on me, and I didn't have no place to sleep, so I went to the police station. And I asked them if I could sleep in the station or if they had a place for me. And they just told me that sleep on that table. So I climbed up on that table and I slept there. The next morning I was hitchhiking on towards Eastland, and I was out, one man put me off out in the country, and I was walking down the road, and there was a house off to my right, and you could see the smoke. See, there wasn't no electric or gas stoves or whatnot. It's all wood stove, and you could see the smoke coming out of the chimney, and I could smell bacon frying. And that's the nearest I ever come asking for something to eat, but I didn't do it. I just didn't go up there. But you can, you was asking about the Depression. Can you imagine not having no bills at all to pay? No water bill, no light bill, no gas bill, and there's no paper towel, no tissues. It's and another thing, I won't say it on the sanitation for ladies, no such. And there was no, I remember the first car that I ever seen was Lawrence Lane was the mayor of Hyco, and he bought this Ford car. And then my uncle had a no Star car. And in my daddy's funeral, there was 2 cars and a long list of wagons and buggies. And of course, my daddy was laid out there at home. There wasn't no funeral home. And my mother was also laid out at home. And I remember my daddy's funeral, but me and my little sister, we was talking about where was my mother's funeral, and we still don't know. I don't remember it. I know there was one somewhere, but I don't know where it was. And I was very small, and my brother we broke up housekeeping. My sister was 3 years younger than me, my brother 2 years older than me. Then I had a sister that was 4 years older than me. Then I had another brother that was 6 years older than me. Well, that's all there was left at home. we split up. My little sister went to my oldest sister's, and I went to my half-sister's for a while. I lived with my half-sister. And I guess the biggest tragic that ever happened in my life, I had a donkey and a dog, and old Buster, and I went to live with my half-sister. Well, my brother-in-law, he raised hounds, and of course my little black and white dog, he didn't mix with them hounds. So he gave me $1 for that dog, put a rope around his neck and led him right out in front of the house and shot him in front of me. Now that gets you. That was, then I had to sell my donkey. I couldn't keep it because it eat. And it was pretty, I had a guardian, and every fall of the year was school time. Well, he'd send us three of us, $25 a piece to buy school clothes. Well, my brother-in-law would take that $25, and my nephew's the same age I was, we're the same size, and he'd take that $25 and buy him his boy clothes and me clothes. So actually, my $25 was just 12 and a half. Of course, clothes was cheap, and we got through it all right. But me and that nephew, we lived together for 6 years, and we didn't ever have a disagreement. We'd borrow from one another, and we dated together, we worked together and slept together, and we're still just as close as it can be. And this Sunday I want to go to his family reunion. He's 84. No, he won't be 84 till September. He likes a little bit being as old as I am. Mine's in April and his in September.
How far along did you get in school?
If I could have finished, I would have went the first semester in the 10th grade. And I was a good basketball player, so how come I didn't make it that far? The kids made my grades. I didn't have to study because I was a good basketball player, and they made my grades for me. And at that time, there was no way I could have went on because I was having to make my own living and living everywhere. And whenever you're down, then everybody kicks you. Well, you got to do something. People says, "Oh, you could have got an education if you wanted to." There wasn't no way. I couldn't have possibly got it because I had to make a living and live all by myself. I lived in rooming houses, boarding houses, and slept out on the ground. I've been some pretty ratty places. I lived in Brownwood in a garage. I was cooking in a cafe, and all that was in that garage was a shelf for me to sleep on. I had my clothes there. I was working in Midland one time, and I was getting pretty good pay for cooking this. I was getting $70 or $80 a week. I went over to J.C. Penney's, and I wore 14 and a half size shirts, and they had a stack of white shirts, 69 cents. So I bought them all. And a few months later, I was in California, and I paid 75 cents a piece to get those shirts laundried that I paid 69 cents for. That was the difference in Texas and California. Well, anything else you will need to know? I don't know.
Can't think of anything I need to know. Is there anything else you'd like to say or to talk about a little bit? Any memories that you'd like to preserve?
I don't know of any. The bad memories, I'd rather forget them. Of course, I've given my testimony. I have been so low that there wasn't, the people on the streets would go around me to keep from speaking to me. I didn't have any friends at all, and I was drinking, and no place to stay, but I was working all the time. I would drink at night and work in daytime, but I didn't have any friends at all. And after I went in service and got out, the people in Stephenville, I don't know, back in 56 or 7, I was ordained as a deacon in the Crescent Heights Baptist Church. And those people down there couldn't believe it, because I wasn't that kind of a guy. But now the people that I know in Stephenville, they realize it now, but there's not even, I've outlived nearly everybody. Most of my friends is, Jack Hale went to service with me. And we was in service together, and we was out here at Camp Barker together. And he was late falling out for reveille one morning, and this platoon sergeant said, "Why are you so late?" He says, "I was hanging up them clothes." He says, "Didn't you ever hang up your clothes at home?" He says, "Yeah, but not so darn many." That's the most clothes he ever had. We had 2 full suits, clothes. It's something else. You might want to take this little book and blow up some of the pictures.
Yeah.
That's,
Thank you.
but don't lose it.
No, I won't. That's nice. I thank you very much for talking to me, and we appreciate your stories that you told us, and I'm glad to get them down on tape for you.
You going to put it on tape for me?
You can get a tape. I think there's a fee, but I don't know how much. Was it $15? But
Well, I'll charge you $15 for the interview.
Okay.